Hello. Good morning. Good keynote. You're all afraid of each other, I can see. Everybody's sitting at arm's length. So I was told that you should defrag and collect in the middle, but yeah, it looks like we're doing okay. So I'm Glenn. Hello, thank you. I'll be here for the next hour and trying to enjoy myself, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit on the way. If you want to get in touch with me, reach me out via Twitter or email. I mostly enjoy that if you're nice. So I work at a law tech startup called Justify. We're basically making law more accessible for everyone by creating some digital tools to make legal products that people should have, like wills, cohabitation contracts, power of attorney, all that kind of stuff, prenups, whatever. Now, in doing so, we need to collect a non-trivial amount of personal data. It includes marriage status, how many kids you have, what are the kids' names, what are their age, who's alive, who's dead, lots of personal stuff. In addition to that, we're reasonably aggressive on the analytics side, because we're a startup, nobody's done what we are doing. So we need to learn as much as possible about our users and their behavior. So we want to gather a lot of data on how our features are used, what are not, how many times used on different screens, and so on and so forth. So in doing that, we've been thinking a lot about privacy, and I've thought a lot about it before that, and I'm here today to share some of the insight and decisions we've made with you. Now, important. I work at a law tech, I work with lawyers, but I am not a lawyer. In Norway, I cannot legally give you legal advice. It is against the law for me to give you legal advice. So anything I say today is not legal advice. It is suggestions. There are a few things you should look into. There's some things you should talk to your legal counsel about, or ignore at your own risk, or some things that just makes good common sense when you think about them, and things you should probably talk to your business about. But do not go to someone and say, well, Glenn said it. Because in that case, you're on your own. Now, definitions. What is privacy? We're going to be developing privacy, so we need to talk about what that is. It is telling users what personal data is collected and how it will be used. Information. Making users informed of what they have or what you have of their data. Giving users a choice on giving you that personal information and how it will be used. So giving power to the user over their own data. It's about setting a purpose. What are you using the data for? Ensuring that it is protected. Like, if they give you their data, can they be reasonably sure that you'll keep it safe and keep it secret? Can you handle the ring? And ensuring data protection comply with the law, which is the smallest of the parts. Now, I said personal data. What is personal data? Personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person or data subject. That is the text in Article 4 of the GDPR. GDPR is the General Data Protection Rules, regulations in the EU, which covers everyone making stuff for people in the EU and the European Economic Community, which means most of the world, except a few American companies that just block services for European users. Now, also related, California is making legislation that is very similar to GDPR, which means pretty soon everyone who wants to do business with California in the US, which is again most of the US, have to comply to similar rules. So if you want to be ahead of the curve, then go for GDPR. Now, identifiable natural person, let's define that as well. So one who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular, by reference to an identifier such as a name, identification number, location data, online identifiers, one or more factors, physical, psychological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity of that natural person. In short, anyone that you can point to and say, dude, this is your data. This thing here is about you. Also interesting, the indirectly part. We'll get back to that in a moment, but it means not only direct data about you, but also things that are not about you, but I can link it to you. Now, why do we care? So for us, we're a law tech startup. We're doing shit nobody's ever done. And we're asking people to trust us with some of their closest, most personal things. Who should inherit what? Where does grandma's old silverware go? For us, trust is a business factor. If people do not trust us, we will go out of business. Nobody will come to us and ask us to take care of this stuff if they don't trust us. It's a PR nightmare if something comes out for us. It can be a competitive differentiator. DuckDuckGo does the exact same thing as Google does, but with more privacy. That is their single competitive differentiator. They don't do a better search, but they do it with more privacy. Loyalty often goes up with choice and control. And let's be fair, it is kind of the right thing. Don't be a Volkswagen developer. Do the right thing, right? Don't be evil. Now, security and privacy are not the same thing. Security is important, right, Niall? But it's not the same thing. Now, there are overlap. For instance, information disclosure has a lot to do with security and a lot to do with privacy. But protect against denial of service has little or nothing to do with privacy, and notice and consent has little or nothing to do with security. So they're not the same thing, but people confuse them. There are 4 types of data: anonymous, pseudo-anonymous, personal identifying information, or PI, and then sensitive PII. Let's talk about a little bit of what these things are. Anonymous data are data that is not unique or tied to any specific person. They are general traits that can be applied to tons of, just go in here and around and up the stairs. Okay, or maybe not. They can be applied to anyone. It can also be statistics distilled from several users, like aggregated data. Like in this area, 75% of people do this, or have this, or live in this kind of house, or have solar panels, or whatever. Pseudonymous data can be restored to its original state. It's a unique identifier, but it doesn't represent a specific person. But you can have a link to it. So it is, for instance, biometric information, my fingerprint. If you have a data of a fingerprint, you cannot tell who that person is. But if you have a link, then my fingerprint becomes personal identifiable information. If you have a bunch of data on your smart home, what switches went on when and so forth, and when people came and went and whatever, there's nothing in that data that identifies a person. But if you link it to a person, it can tell you a lot about that person, right? So there's data that are in reality anonymous, in practice anonymous, but if you link it, it is not. If you break the link, if you have personal data or associated data, and you break that link, you can sometimes, if you're careful, make personal identifiable information pseudonymous. I will look at an example of someone trying to do that. Personal identifiable information identifies or can be used to contact or locate a specific individual. These are all the things that if I look at that data, I will know, oh, that's him. oh, this is her, right? Name, phone, address, IP address. And then you have sensitive, which are PI with a higher risk with exposure, financial data, medical data, national ID number in some countries, not in Norway. Also data that can be used to discriminate. Ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth. Very often you'll have in the local laws and regulations, it would be specified what data is sensitive data. So those are 4 kinds of data. Now, pop quiz. AOL released in 2006 some search data. In fact, 20 million web queries from about 650,000 users over a period of 3 months. They put that online thinking, this will make for some cool research. They had an anonymous user ID number. They had the query time, item rank, where they clicked, and click URL, the domain portion of whatever site they clicked on. Thinking that, oh, that's cool. People can do some interesting stuff with this. And they did. Meet user number 4,417,749, Thelma Arnold. 62-year-old widow who lives in Lilburn, Georgia, and her dog, Dudley. It turned out it wasn't hard to find. Because they were searching, they found a user, because you correlate all the searches that a single person did. And then they found searches like single men 60 plus. Landscape architects, Lilburn, Georgia. And all kinds of stuff like that. She frequently researched her friend's medical ailments and loves her 3 dogs. And like she said, those are my searches, she said after a reporter read the part of a list to her. My goodness, it's my whole personal life. I had no idea somebody was looking over my shoulder. So we cannot put the burden of privacy on our users. It is up to us, as the professionals, to take care of our users' privacy. Tangent, if you have some spare time, go on YouTube, look it up online. There's a documentary called I Love Alaska, which is made on the basis of another user search, and it's interesting. Again, why do we care? AOL settled the Data Valdez lawsuit, it was called, after the Exxon Valdez accident where they oil spill. So this was called Data Valdez. $5 million US. Nice settlement there. Everybody got like $20 or something that was in the search in the case, class action lawsuit. This was before GDPR. GDPR Article 83 sets that you can be responsible for administrative fines up to 20 million euros, or in the case of an undertaking, which means a whole set of companies that own each other, 4% of the total worldwide annual turnover. Which means that if you're a large company with a global presence, they will fine you 4% of your global worldwide turnover. Not your earnings, but your turnover. Whichever is higher. This is how you as a developer can make somebody care. Right? Now, that's personal data. Why do we care? And a lot of people will say, well, that's fine. We're not going to collect anything. But there are some ways you can legally and safely collect data. When we look at these rules, there are consent, contract, legal obligation, vital interest, public trust, and legitimate interest. These are all defined in GDPR Article 6.1, which is, unlike many legal documents, pretty straightforward to read. Consent. Consent is that you ask a user, can we keep this data about you? This is the last thing you want to do. You want to avoid asking for consent as much as possible. Because under GDPR, consent must be freely given. It must be clear and unambiguous and easily withdrawn and for a specific purpose. This has consequences. It means that if you're asking to process some data, you have to be upfront. I'm going to use the data for this. Is it okay? They have to understand what you're asking. And it has to be freely given, which means you cannot use that as a condition to use your service. It's like, well, if you don't give me that, I don't want to play with you. According to GDPR, that's not allowed. You cannot have consent as a condition for using your stuff. It has to be easily withdrawn. So you have to allow your users to use your thing without consent. You have to manage consent. You have to keep track of when it was given, how it was given, and so forth. And they have to be able to withdraw that consent, and you have to take care of that as well. And every time you use data, you have to check, oh, do I still have consent? La, 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 la. This is a burden. Do not default to consent. So the other part is contract. It is necessary for the performance of a contract to which the data subject is party, or in order to take steps at the request of the data subject prior to entering into a contract, which means if you need some information to give the user what they're asking you to do, then you can collect that information. You can also collect that information before they actually enter into a contract with you or buy your service, if you need that information. So that means, for instance, you can collect their name and email address as a registration process. If I'm buying business card from someone, I'll expect them to need and process my name, my email. I can't not consent to them keeping my email if I want my email on my business card, right? So we're in the business of making wills. I need to know if you're married or not. I need to know how many kids you have. What are their names? When were they born? Who are your parents in some cases? What do you own? What's your house? I need to know these things. You cannot not consent to giving me those things, because then I can't make the thing I'm trying to give you. Be careful though. Do not collect more data than you actually need. It is easy to overshoot and say, oh, I'll just get all the, well, do you really need that to fulfill your obligation? Maybe not. Legal obligation. It's the next one. This is how GDPR does not come in conflict with other laws. If you have laws and regulations that require you to keep some data, for instance, in Norway, we have financial laws that says you have to keep all bills of sale and everything for 10 years, then you do that. That is a legal obligation. You have to do that. So this basically just gets you off the hook for GDPR when it comes into conflict to other laws. Vital interests. Most people, I'm guessing, will never touch on this one. It basically means that you need to save someone's life. I need to keep this information in order to keep you safe. Maybe the health industry has some stuff here. Like, I need to know your blood work, I need to know your illnesses in order to actually keep you alive. Public task, anyone works in the government here or for the public administration? One. This is more or less a free pass for the government. Process is necessary for the performance of a task carried out in the public interest or in the exercise of the official authority vested in the controller, which basically means that the government has said that we need to do this for the public good, and that's okay. Then you can collect this information. And then we have the last one, which is the iffy one, legitimate interest. Processing is necessary for the purposes of the legitimate interest pursued by the controller or by the third party, which means you need this data. I would like this data. I have an interest in this data. Except where such interests are overridden by the interest of fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject, which means the user. which require protection of their personal data, particularly where the data subject is a child. Now, this can be almost anything. It's almost like a little get-out-of-free card. Yes, of course we have a legitimate interest in this. But it's not as straightforward. So you have to show it is a legitimate interest. You actually need this data. It's not something you're collecting, well, just in case. It might be handy. Data is the new oil and everything, right? No, you actually have a serious legitimate interest in this. You need this data to fulfill this interest. There is no other reasonable or less intrusive way that you can collect it, can gather or fulfill the same interest. And it's balanced. It's a balance between your gain and the data subject's loss or harm, right? So for instance, we're running a public website. We would like to be able to monitor the use of that website. We would like to be able to monitor attempts of break-ins. We would like to monitor against denial of service attacks and all kinds of stuff. In order to do those things, we need to keep track of IP addresses. IP address is personal identifiable information. It has been defined in court as such. Because if I have the IP address, I can figure out who used that. Now, I have a legitimate interest in keeping that IP address. There's no other way I can protect against the same things without the IP address, so I have a need for it. And I have to balance this against your needs and fundamental rights. Now I can say, okay, I need this more than you need it, basically. Me keeping these IP addresses doesn't necessarily hurt you, and I can make it less hurtful for you by reducing the amount of time I keep it. For instance, say I'll keep it for 4 days. That way I can have the IP address over the weekend. If something goes wrong, I can go back in the logs and check and see, okay, so, oh, wow, all this stuff came from the same address. This is something fishy. After 4 days, I can delete it if I want. If you use the legitimate interest clause, I recommend you strongly to have a process in place to keep a written record of the evaluations you did here. Why is it a legitimate interest? Why do you need it? Why is there no other way you can fulfill the same interest? And how does it balance your need versus the fundamental rights of the data subject? Keep a track of that and put it in your privacy policy. We'll get to what a privacy policy is afterwards. Also, member states can add their own regulations to these things to make them stricter. Anyone doing business in Germany? Yeah, I'm sorry. Germany are a lot stricter on this. So if you try to do business in Germany, they will come back with this massive list of stuff that they want you to do. Right, Martin? And in many cases, you'll have to evaluate, is it actually worth it? But then again, it's a huge market. So in this case, we'll often have data in several categories that you want to associate, figure out which one it is. Does it go in this one? Doesn't go in this one? Can we get away with this one? I'm not a lawyer. I'm guessing most of you definitely are not lawyers. I'm not going to go deep into examples of this and that because it is very often context related. Different companies will have different legitimate interests in the same data and different reasons for it. So go ask your lawyer. The important takeaway for you here is that there are different ways of justifying data collection. You as a developer need to be aware of this, not just default to consent, which just gives you work. You need to talk to your business, figure out what data do they want, and ask him, is this something you need or something you want? And do not default into just collecting a bunch of data. Many developers will just turn telemetry to 11 and just gather and log as much as possible, because that makes our job easier when shit breaks, which shit tends to do. But you have to be careful with that. Brings me to the next point, data minimization. Data you do not need is a liability. Do not collect more data than you actually need. If all you need is an email to send a newsletter, then you do not need date of birth, gender, and so on and so forth. It has been, when we're talking about indirectly, there was a study that showed if you had date of birth, gender, and zip code in the US, you could uniquely identify 80-something% of the US population. So those three things, which are not personal identifiable information in their own, but when combined, definitely is. So data you collect, they're a liability to you. You have to keep track of that. You have to make sure that it's treated properly. If your app do not need certain data in order to function, any data you collect that you don't need, you are responsible for keeping and transmitting that data securely, maintaining access to it, and so on and so forth. There have been so many cases where people gather some data, it's not really important, and suddenly it's in the wild, and it's like, oh, that was kind of important. Don't do that. Now, privacy policy. How many have a privacy policy in their company, on their website? Yeah, that they know? Yeah? Okay, good, cool. I'm just going to go quickly through that. It's something you need to be aware of exists. It should have your company's name and contact details, data protection officer details if you have one. And here's the things that you need to be involved in. Why do you need to process this personal data? What is your legal basis? Are you doing this because of field contract? Is legitimate need? Is it vital interest? If you're relying on legitimate need, then include your reasoning for it. Will you be sharing your data with someone? How long will you be storing it? And information about their rights, including where can they complain. These are the headlines of what should be in a privacy policy. Now, how do we do these things? What are some techniques that we can use? Aggregation, separation, anonymization, pseudo-anonymization, which is a technique, data expiry, and encryption. So aggregation. Aggregation is the technique of rolling data together into a smaller set of data, usually by using a bigger scale of measurement. So we collect data in weeks instead of days or hours. We use city instead of zip code. We use a region instead of a whole city. We'll set the last 2 octets in your IP address to 0. So, when doing so, you remove the chance of being able to identify a single person in your data, but the data can still be useful. However, you need to be careful. So we had a case where we tracked smart homes. This is not where I worked, this was before it wasn't the case. We gathered data from smart homes with solar panels, and we wanted to know approximately where they were, because we had wanted to correlate stuff with weather, forecasts, and stuff like that. So we had precise GPS locations, which is just 2 numbers. So we rounded them off. So instead of a point, it became a square, basically. But it turns out that a square in a city is different than a square of the same size out in the country. Because in the city, well, then that square, you'll find 50 houses with solar panels. And out in the country, with the same square, you'll find a single house with solar panels. So we thought we were clever, and then someone asked hard questions, and we were like, I'm dumb. So yeah, we can aggregate data up, but make sure the aggregation makes sense. It's the same, anyone has employee satisfaction surveys in their company? Like, how are you doing? Are you happy with your boss? Is your boss an asshole? Yes, no. On a scale of 5 to 10, how much an asshole is your boss? And they usually don't give those numbers out to bosses unless you have at least this many people in their department answering. It's like, yeah, we're a department of 2 people and my boss. Let's be brutally honest on this anonymous form. So they aggregate data up. It's like, no, the measurement, the sample size is too small. We need to aggregate bigger. Separation of data. Store your information separate from the rest of the identity. Even if it's just a different table in your database server. It reduces this risk of inadvertent exposure. Different table, different database. In the world of microservices, where we have autonomous services that each have their own database, then don't pull all the data into it. Keep only what they need. So this data is over here, this data is over here. Maybe this data is sensitive, that should be in a different place. It also allows you to set different permissions to things. Like this service doesn't need access to this table. It should never pull data from this table. We have the OWASP top 10 security risk. SQL injection is still number 1 right now? No, it's dropped for the first time in like 10 years. 4 or 5. Still, SQL injection, the simple art of just writing SQL in a form on the website and then dumping data from databases out, it's on the top 5 list of vulnerabilities on the internet. By separating the data, you make the job of pulling that data out harder. Anonymization. Remove personal data completely. Make sure you actually do that. So when you're making something anonymous, make sure you're not making it anonymous-ish. And then we have pseudo-anonymization, which is remove personal data-ish. And we talked about this. It is a technique. People use it, especially in this day and age where you want to do machine learning sometime in the future. We want to collect this data because at some unspecified point in the future, we would like to do some machine learning on that and learn stuff and make billions. And if you're not careful with how you do this, then you're not doing your job. The common thing here is having your user ID and then have another ID and then use that ID to collect the data, and the user wants to be deleted, you remove the link. But the data's still there, and if you look at the data, you can maybe start doing some analytics. How many houses in that location with the solar panel do we have? Kind of thing. So yeah. It works well when you can do it, but be super careful with it because it's so easy to think, oh, it's anonymous. No, it's not. Not really. Data expiry. Remove personal data after a while. I do not need this anymore. Now, the thing that a lot of people worry about are backups. This includes one of the fundamental rights specified in the GDPR as well, the right to be forgotten, where people can come to you and says, I would like you to delete all my information. And you have to go, okay, we'll do that. Now, what do you have to do? Do you have to go back to your backup tapes and restore all the data and remove them and then back it up again? Kind of a hassle. One consulting company, in all seriousness, suggested that each client should be backed up to a separate thing. I was like, how dumb are you? The administrative burden on this is overwhelming. Now, luckily for us, the CNIL France's GDPR supervising authority has gone out and said, no, you do not have to delete backups when complying with the right to erasure. And when one government, when one national body says something, most other national bodies will go, yeah, okay, except Germany. They will go, I don't know about that. The French say it, you say? Now, nonetheless, they do also specify, they clearly explain that data subject has to know that the data will be kept, the backups, for a length of time outlined in your retention policy. So how long is that? So on and so forth. You must also demonstrate that it would be impractical for you to delete that data. At the very least, when you keep data and you want to keep data for a long time, you should be part, or ask, you as a developer should ask for a risk assessment, the business impact assessment, and a data protection impact assessment. Like, you should ask the business, like, we're keeping this data essentially forever. Do we know we're doing this? Because in a lot of cases, again, this comes back to you as the professional. You'll talk to managers, you'll talk to business people, and then they were like, we're keeping data forever? I did not know this. You are the people closest to the actual data. It is up to you to inform the business that we need to take care of this. And then encryption. Encryption at rest. This applies to backups as well. Encrypt your files before backing them up. If the tapes are stolen, make sure that nobody can just restore tons of personal data. Encrypt files at rest on your machines. Is your machine stolen? Encrypt your database files. If someone breaks into a server, then unless they break through the database, they cannot access the data, because the database has the keys for the data. You have unfaithful servants that might not have access directly to the data, but they can access the data files indirectly. Make sure they can't pull them out and use them for something. And of course, we can also protect our local hard drives, but personal data should never be on your local hard drive. So don't put it there. It's like, wow, my disk is encrypted. You should not have the entire database of social security numbers on your hard drive. And we'll talk about that. Now, access. Who has access to production? How many of you can access production data right now from a laptop here in this room? Quite a few. Shame on you. But we do it because it's convenient. So we could get, even if you can't access it right now, you probably could get access if you wanted. You could look up a password. You could use a VPN. How many of you who can access personal data or production data have that access audited, where it's logged that you access this data today? 1, 2, 2.5. So it is fairly, well, it's not trivial, but it's not black magic to make sure that the only one that has access to production data or the production environment is your deployment server. You can check in code. It goes to dev environment, it goes to a test environment, QA environment, staging environment, whatever you want to call it. Eventually, it is deployed into production. If you're using DevOps practices, CI/CD, deployment into production should be automatic. There should be no need for you as an individual to have access to the production environment, to log into the production database on a regular basis. Also, you have a database and you have a web server. How does that web server access the database? Well, we have a connection string. Great. Do you have a password in your connection string? Yes, we do. Who has access to the database? No one, just the web server. Who has access to the web server? Everyone. So you have access to the web server, you can read the password for the database, and if you have access to the password database, you can read the database. Is the database locked down so only the web server can access it? No, probably not. Well, you can only access it from our network. So great, so you have 50 developers who can access production data at any time if they wanted to. Well, yes. So one technique there is not using a password in your connection string. How many has passwords in the connection string? I do. Yeah. You can use the identity of the machine of the web server and give that access instead. If you're running stuff in Azure, you can set up what's called a managed service identity, which means your web role has a user. And you can give that user access to the database. This used to be kind of hard because you had to change your code to do it. Now they recently came up with a fix, which means you can just configure it in web config, no code changes, and you have a managed Azure AD identity, access the database, and nobody else needs permissions and no passwords anywhere. How many have stuff in Azure? Quite a few. How many run Security Center and run an audit on the stuff in Azure? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Security Center in Azure, there's a free tier. You click on it and it will show you, these are your problems. And one of the things it does is identify those kinds of things, and also it will identify auditing. Do you audit your access? Can you see who has accessed my data lately? Now, if you set it up that only deployment server has access to production, sometimes you will need access to production. There's tools for that. In Azure, we have something called privileged identity management, which means that you can go in and say, I need access, I need this kind of access for a period of time. I want to have access to this subscription. I want to have access from this time for, in this case, 8 hours because reasons. I need access to this resource group in Azure. Which means you can have your stuff in Azure, nobody has direct access, but they can request access explicitly, which is audited, which can go through an approval process, which you can require MFA, multi-factor authentication, for them to upgrade their access. You can conduct reviews with this. Do we still need these roles? You can download the audit history for external audit. Why do people activate? You can use the notifications to see why do people activate it. Can we fix the symptoms of why they need this access? And also encryption and rest, we talked about that. SQL Server has what's called transparent data encryption, where it will encrypt the data. If you put stuff on files, encrypt the data. Every Azure service you've heard of has encryption at rest. Most of them are turned on in default. Some has to be turned on manually. Any PII that is stored somewhere should be stored in an encrypted state. It ensures that nobody can come in the back way and grab your data. Every other environment than production should have test data. There are numerous cases online, if you go look, where developers made a copy of production database for a test environment. And sometimes they made a copy into a MongoDB with default settings, which back in the day meant no username and password. And then people like Niall go online and find shit. And like, oh, this thing is interesting. I wonder what this is. And then they release heaps of personal data. But we need realistic data to test it. The only time you need production data to test with is when the actual data creates an error. Because the data is formed in a specific way, then it fails. Which, to be fair, is not often. And in many cases, you look a little bit hard on the logs and look at the error, you might be able to figure it out anyway. But what can we do then? How can we make realistic data sets? Because the other side of this coin is that we don't have access to production data, and then you test your thing, with your application, like 5 items in your dev database, and then you put it in production, you have like 1 million, everything just crawls to a halt. Well, I like Bogus. Bogus is a nice little tool that will generate realistic-looking data. For instance, here, I'll make a new faker of order. Order ID will increment, pick some fruit, random fruit and put in a basket. Random quantity, 1 to 10. And then you can just say, like, make 10,000 of these. So this is a very simple way of generating test data to put in your test databases. Your development databases, your test database, your staging database, and so forth. Another technique that people use is that they will copy data from the production database and then obfuscate or hide the data as you go. This is risky at best. Because you might forget something. Are you properly anonymizing this? If you look back at the couple of samples we did, how well are you doing that job, right? So you want to be careful with that. It's a viable solution, but you need to be real careful when you copy that data. Are you hiding everything? I've seen people take the data and just hash everything in the copy, or just one-way encrypt it, and then throw away the key. Then you get something that looks like it, but not really, and sometimes you can decrypt it, so it's like, yeah, be careful with that. I prefer just generating data. I like to spend a little bit of time making my test sets look semi-realistic. And then I can use this when setting up databases for test, deployments, to staging, everything, and I get data that looks realistic and it's completely fake. ASP.NET Core has some GDPR extensions. Anybody know that? Yeah. So this has to do with cookies. Now we all know the cookie cutter thing that comes up on every single site in the universe now, that covers half your screen. We have these 12 million cookies. Now, I have deliberately avoided advertisements here because that is a minefield, because there are always things you do not need. You do not have a legitimate interest to showing, tracking people across sites. And there's consent all over the place. But ask your ad, if you're running ads, talk to your ad people about GDPR. They'll have that stuff figured out because that is their core business. But in ASP.NET, when you're doing cookies, you can specify cookies being essential or not. And you can say that you need consent. So you put up the use cookie policy. App use cookie policy. And then you can say, is a cookie essential? Then it will be stored either way. And any cookie not marked as essential will not be stored unless they have accepted cookies. Temp data and session state are by default non-essential. Which means if you use this and people do not accept, temp data won't work and session state won't work. You can add them, you can elect them to be essential, but by default they're not. Right. That was what I had. If you have any questions, that would be a good time for Q&A. Anyone have anything they're wondering about? You have to shout out because I really can't see your hands there, I think.
What is the point of data expiry? Companies can just keep backups indefinitely.
What is the point of data expiry when companies can keep data indefinitely? Pardon? What is the point of data expiry when companies can keep backups with the same data indefinitely? It has to do with access to data. It has to do with the purpose you're keeping it for. So if you remember back, I said when you put up privacy, you inform the users not only that you'll keep data, but also what you will be using them for. So you say, I will use this data for this purpose, and I will keep that data for 2 weeks. The same data will also go in the backup tapes, and they will live for 5 years. You cannot legally take the data from the backup after 2 years back and use them for the first purpose. Then you are breaking the law. So it has to do with, the difference is the purpose for why you're keeping the data that you informed the user. That is the difference. Was that clear? Yeah. Any other questions? I can go over here and see better. Okay, no. Well, if you're wondering about something, remember the legal eagle is watching you, and I'll be here for the rest of the week. So come say hi if nothing else, or tell me I suck. Oh, by the way, they wanted some help in tidying up, so there's a bunch of green cards in there. If you could put them in the box, that would be great when you're exiting. Thank you.